The moment 3,000 Valkyrie warships materialized around my fleet like a closing fist, I knew two things with absolute certainty. We were outgunned by a factor of 50, and I had no intention of surrendering. My name is Dex Harlan. I hold the rank of commander in the Terran Frontier Service, and I captain the TFS Iron Meridian, a patrol cruiser built for speed, endurance, and the kind of deep space stubbornness that only humans seem to appreciate. On that particular morning, if you can call it morning, when you are 900 light-years from any sun, I was leading a 5-ship patrol fleet through what our charts listed as uncharted territory. The Iron Meridian, the Black Ridge, the Vanguard Dawn, the Corsair, and the Little Defiance, our corvette, the smallest and fastest of the group. We had dropped out of Slipstream, expecting empty space, maybe a rogue asteroid field, maybe a gas giant worth flagging for future mining operations. What we found instead was a wall of metal and light that stretched across every angle of our sensor display until the screen itself seemed to groan under the weight of the data. 3,000 warships, each one roughly triple the size of the Iron Meridian. They sat in perfect formation, a geometric cage built from hulls the color of dried blood, and every single one of them had their weapons arrays pointed directly at us. My tactical officer, Lieutenant Priya Vasquez, was the first to speak. She pulled the numbers from her console and fed them to my chair display without a word. I read them in silence. No survivable engagement scenario, 0% chance of breakthrough. Estimated time to total fleet destruction under concentrated fire stood at 4 minutes and 11 seconds. 4 minutes. That was how long 5 Terran patrol ships would last against the combined firepower of the formation surrounding us. Less time than it takes to brew a cup of coffee. I looked at Vasquez. She looked back at me with an expression that sat somewhere between professional calm and the kind of grin you see on someone who has already decided they are not going to have a boring day. My helmsman, a quiet man named Derek Calloway, had his hands on the flight controls. His fingers were steady, not locked rigid with tension, but genuinely steady, the way they always were, whether he was docking at a station or threading through an asteroid belt. Sandra Price, my chief engineer, was already at her station, running power distribution calculations, shifting energy reserves toward our shields and weapons without being asked. That was Price. She never waited for orders. She read the situation and started solving problems before anyone else had finished identifying them. The comms channel crackled before I could say anything. A voice filled the bridge, deep and resonant, speaking in perfect standard English, with an accent that did not belong to any human tongue. It carried the weight of authority so old it had fossilized into something beyond arrogance. It was simply fact, the way gravity is fact. Unidentified vessels, you have entered Dominion sovereign space. You will power down all weapon systems and navigational drives immediately. You will surrender your ships and present yourselves for cataloging. Your species will be assessed for integration or labor designation. Resistance is extinction. This offer is not repeated. The bridge went quiet. Not the quiet of fear. The quiet of 5 people processing something so absurd that their brains needed a moment to catch up with their ears. Labor designation. Cataloging. Integration. They were telling us to come in, sit down, shut up, and wait to be sorted like cargo. I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then I opened a fleet-wide channel to my other 4 captains. Captain Nkechi Okonkwo on the Black Ridge came through first. Her voice was dry as desert sand. So, standard Tuesday then. Captain Lena Dracoff on the Corsair snorted. I had money on first contact being friendlier than this. Guess I owe Cato a drink. Captain Reese Cato on the Vanguard Dawn chimed in with the calm of a man who had been through worse. You owe me too. I called hostile and ugly. Captain Yusuf Hadid on the Little Defiance, the youngest of us at 26, laughed outright. Did they say labor designation? Do they know what happens when you try to make humans do something they do not want to do? I let them talk for a moment. Their voices settled me, the way they always did. These were not just colleagues. They were the best officers I had ever served with, each one tested by years of frontier patrols in the deepest reaches of explored space. We had faced pirates together, navigated gravitational anomalies that should have torn our ships apart, and rescued stranded colonies from the edge of extinction. We trusted each other with our lives, because we had already proven that trust 100 times over. Then I switched to broadband transmission, the channel wide open so every ship in that massive alien armada could hear every word. I took a breath. I looked out through the forward viewport at the endless field of warships that surrounded us, each one capable of cracking our hulls like eggs. I thought about the reasonable thing to do, the smart thing, the thing that every survival manual ever written would recommend in a situation where you are outnumbered by a factor of 600 to 1. Then I chuckled. Yeah, I said. No. The word hung in the void between our ships and theirs. 5 tiny vessels facing 3,000 giants, and the answer was no. I kept going. I am Commander Dex Harlan of the Terran Frontier Service. I appreciate the offer, but we are going to have to decline. Humans do not power down. We do not get cataloged. And we absolutely do not do labor designation. If you would like to discuss trade agreements, mutual border recognition, or maybe a decent recipe for coffee, we are happy to talk. Otherwise, I suggest you reconsider your approach. Behind me, Vasquez started laughing. It was quiet at first, just a breath of sound escaping through her nose. Then it grew. Across the fleet channel, I heard it spreading. Okonkwo's low, rolling laugh. Dracov's sharp bark of amusement. Cato's steady chuckle. Hadid's full, bright laughter that sounded like someone who had never once in his life considered the possibility of surrender. The transmission carried all of it. 5 ships of humans, laughing at 3,000 warships. The response from the alien fleet was immediate and visible. On the sensor display, I watched formations shift. Ships that had been holding in perfect geometric precision suddenly wavered, individual vessels drifting slightly out of alignment. It was small, barely measurable, but I had been reading fleet movements for 15 years, and I knew what uncertainty looked like from the outside. I was looking at it now. The voice returned. The same speaker, the same impossible authority, but now there was an edge beneath it. The barest crack in something that was not accustomed to cracking. You misunderstand your position. In 9,000 years, no species has refused the Dominion's offer of integration. Every civilization that has encountered the Valkyrie has accepted its place within the order. You are 5 vessels. We are the Valkyrie Dominion. We span 9,000 star systems. We have cataloged and integrated 412 species. Your defiance is not courage, it is ignorance. 9,000 years. 412 species, 9,000 star systems. The numbers were staggering. This was not some regional power with delusions of grandeur. This was a galactic empire, older than most of human civilization, and we had just stumbled into its front door with 5 patrol ships and a bad attitude. I looked around my bridge. Nobody had moved. Nobody had flinched. Calloway still had his hands on the controls. Price was still running power calculations. Vasquez had her tactical display zoomed in on the nearest cluster of enemy ships, already picking targets, already planning angles of attack that should not exist given our odds. There was no panic, no hesitation, just a quiet, collective understanding that this moment was exactly the kind of moment that humans had been preparing for since the first time one of our ancestors picked up a rock and decided not to be prey anymore. I opened the channel again. 9,000 years, I said. 412 species. And not one of them told you no? Silence. Then you have never met humans. The silence stretched longer this time. I could feel it across the void, a held breath shared between species that had never laid eyes on each other before this moment. 3,000 alien warships, processing the simple, incomprehensible fact that 5 tiny ships, crewed by strange, soft-bodied primates, were not doing what every species in recorded galactic history had done before them. Then the sensors screamed. Vasquez's voice cut through the alarm. Weapons arrays charging across the full armada. All 3,000 ships, targeting locks across all 5 of our vessels. Time to firing solution. 40 seconds. 40 seconds. That was how long we had before the most powerful military force we had ever encountered opened fire with everything it had. 40 seconds to run, surrender, beg, or pray. I did none of those things. All ships, I said, my voice steady and clear across the fleet channel. Deploy Shroud Protocol, full spectrum, everything we have got. I paused for half a heartbeat, and then added the words that I knew my crews needed to hear. Not because they were afraid, but because they deserved to know that their captain understood exactly what they were about to do, and was proud to do it beside them. Let us show them what 5 ships can do. I need to tell you something about Shroud Protocol before I describe what happened next, because without understanding what it is, nothing that followed will make any sense. Shroud Protocol is not a weapon, it is not a shield. It is a lie told at the speed of light. Terran electronic warfare systems were born from centuries of human conflict, refined through generations of arms races, where deception was as valuable as firepower. We learned early in our history that you do not always need to be stronger than your enemy. Sometimes you just need to be smarter. And sometimes, smart means making your enemy see things that are not there, while hiding the things that are. Shroud Protocol was the culmination of all that history, a system designed to flood enemy sensor networks with ghost signatures, false energy readings, phantom heat sources, and cascading feedback loops that turned an enemy's own targeting computers into instruments of confusion. When deployed at full spectrum, Shroud Protocol could make 5 ships look like 500, not vague blurs or half-formed shadows. Fully detailed, sensor-verified ghost ships broadcasting identical energy signatures, identical drive emissions, and identical weapons profiles, each one behaving with perfect autonomy, executing random maneuvers, changing course, accelerating, and decelerating in patterns that were indistinguishable from real vessels. That is exactly what happened. In the 60 seconds after I gave the order, every sensor array across the Valkyrie Armada went haywire. Where 5 Terran vessels had been sitting moments before, the Valkyrie targeting systems now showed 500 ships scattered across 3-dimensional space. The ghost ships wove between the real Valkyrie formations, turning the enemy's own fleet into a maze of false targets and genuine confusion. The Valkyrie fired. 3,000 warships unleashed their opening salvo into a field of targets that mostly did not exist. Plasma bolts the size of buildings tore through empty space and struck nothing. Kinetic rounds designed to crack planetary crusts slammed into ghost signatures and passed through like fists through smoke. And because the ghost signatures were scattered throughout the Valkyrie formation itself, dozens of Valkyrie ships found themselves in the crossfire of their own fleet's volley. I watched it on my tactical display with a grim fascination. Their own weapons, their own fire, hitting their own hulls because their computers could not tell the difference between us and the shadows we had thrown across their eyes. 14 Valkyrie warships hit by their own fleet's fire in the first exchange, shields buckling, hulls cracking, confusion spreading through their communications like a virus, officers screaming conflicting orders as their instruments told them lies that they had no framework to question. All ships, I said. Attack window is open. Go now. Make it count. We moved. The Iron Meridian dove straight into the chaos. Calloway flew her like she was a fighter craft, not a cruiser, threading between 2 Valkyrie dreadnoughts that were still trying to recalibrate their sensors. Vasquez fired broadsides at point-blank range into both of them as we passed. At that distance, even our patrol-grade weapons punched through their shields like paper. The first dreadnought lost its forward weapons array in a cascade of explosions that ripped across its bow. The second took a direct hit to its engine block and began listing to port, bleeding fire and atmosphere in twin streams that coiled through the void like wounded serpents. On the tactical channel, I listened to my fleet work. Okonkwo's Blackridge was a brawler. She had taken her cruiser straight into the thickest cluster of enemy ships and was using a magnetic harpoon, a mining tool that her engineers had jury-rigged as a combat system 3 months ago during a training exercise that nobody expected to matter. The harpoon latched onto a Valkyrie cruiser's engine housing with a clang that I imagined I could hear across the vacuum, and Okonkwo dragged the crippled ship sideways into the path of incoming fire from its own allies. The Valkyrie cruiser took 4 hits from 4 different friendly ships before the harpoon cable snapped and the wreck spun away into the dark, trailing debris and escape pods. Drakov's Corsair was running a high-speed flanking pattern, darting along the outer edge of the formation and hammering any ship that presented a broadside. Drakov was precise. She did not waste ammunition. Every shot she fired was aimed at a specific system on a specific ship. Engines here, weapons arrays there, sensor clusters on the next target. Every maneuver she executed bought time or created an opening for someone else. She fought like a surgeon, and the Valkyrie bled for it. Cato's Vanguard Dawn was providing cover fire, his heavier weapons platforms laying down suppressive volleys that forced entire Valkyrie squadrons to break formation and scatter. Cato was the oldest of our captains, a veteran of 23 years in the frontier service, and he understood something that younger officers sometimes missed. In a battle where you cannot win, your job is not to destroy the enemy. Your job is to control the tempo. Keep them reacting to you, instead of acting on their own initiative. Cato was doing exactly that, and doing it brilliantly. And hated, young Yusuf Hadid on the Little Defiance was doing something that would have gotten him court-martialed in any training simulation. He had driven his Corvette straight underneath the Valkyrie flagship, a vessel so large it had its own gravitational signature, and was cutting through its ventral armor plating with a repurposed mining laser. The flagship's primary weapons could not depress low enough to target him. Its secondary batteries were designed for targets at medium range, not something clinging to its belly like a tick. Hadid was sitting in the one blind spot on the most powerful ship in the formation, and he was carving through its hull with the patient persistence of a craftsman who knows that even mountains can be taken apart one chip at a time. For 3 glorious, impossible minutes, 5 human ships tore through 3,000 Valkyrie warships like wolves through a startled flock, and the oldest empire in the galaxy could not lay a hand on us. Then they adapted. I will give the Valkyrie this much. They did not survive 9,000 years by being slow learners. A new voice came over their fleet communications, sharp and precise, issuing orders in a language I could not understand, but whose effect I could see immediately on my tactical display. The Valkyrie fleet stopped firing blind. Ships reformed into tight clusters, overlapping their sensor fields, so the ghost signatures could be cross-referenced and eliminated through triangulation. It was elegant, it was efficient, and it was terrifyingly fast. Within 90 seconds, they had cut through nearly 70% of our shroud coverage. "Commander," Vasquez said, her voice tight for the first time, "they are filtering us out. Shroud effectiveness, dropping below 40%. They will have clean targeting locks on all 5 of us within 2 minutes." I felt the window closing. The chaos that had been our ally was being brought to heel by thousands of years of military doctrine adjusting in real time. We had punched above our weight for 3 minutes. Now the weight was about to punch back. "Corsair, report," I called. Drakov's voice came back rough, frayed at the edges. "Took a direct hit to our port side. Decks 7 through 12 are open to space. I have got 19 dead and 30 wounded. We sealed the breaches, but the port shield generator is gone. Engines are holding but one more solid hit, and we are done." 19 dead, 30 wounded. On a ship with a crew of 160. In 3 minutes of combat. The numbers hit me like a physical blow, and I forced myself to absorb them and keep moving, because that was what a commander did. You carried the dead with you, and you kept fighting. "Can you still fight?" I asked. "Commander," Drakov said, and I could hear the iron in her voice, the absolute bedrock certainty that only comes from someone who has looked at the worst and decided it is not enough to stop her. "I will fight this ship until there is nothing left to fight with. All ships, pull in tight, defensive cluster formation. Conserve ammunition and keep shroud active on whatever coverage we have left. We make them come to us." We pulled together, 4 cruisers and a corvette forming a ring in the middle of an ocean of enemies. Hadid had extracted from beneath the flagship and rejoined the formation, his tiny ship trailing sparks and venting coolant, but still very much alive and very much dangerous. In the brief lull that followed, I did something I had hoped I would not have to do. I opened a priority channel to the Iron Meridian's communication array and composed a burst transmission aimed at the nearest Terran relay beacon, a subspace repeater station, roughly 4 light hours away. "This is Commander Dex Harlan, TFS Iron Meridian. To any Terran command authority receiving this message, we have made contact with an alien civilization calling itself the Valkyrie Dominion. They claim sovereignty over 9,000 star systems and have demanded our surrender and subjugation. We have refused. Hostile engagement is underway. Enemy force numbers approximately 3,000 capital warships. Our position is encoded in the attached navigational data. We request immediate reinforcement. Be advised, the Valkyrie possess advanced technology and overwhelming numerical superiority. Approach with full combat readiness. I paused. Then I added one more line. We refuse their demand. Whatever happens next, let the record show that humanity did not kneel. I sent the transmission and watched it vanish into the void at the speed of light. 4 hours to the relay. Hours more for the relay to bounce it to the nearest fleet command. Even if someone responded immediately, reinforcements were a long way off. Maybe too far. Maybe an eternity too far. We were on our own. The Valkyrie Supreme Arbiter hailed me again. A private channel this time, ship to ship, not broadcast. When his voice came through, it was different. The granite authority was still there, but something new lived beneath it. Something I had not expected from the ruler of a 9,000-year empire. Curiosity. Commander Harlan, he said, I am Thalvrin Sorath, Supreme Arbiter of the Valkyrie Dominion. I have overseen the integration of 37 species during my tenure. Not once have I engaged in a prolonged conversation with one that refused. You are a novel experience. First time for everything, I said. Your 5 ships have destroyed or disabled 47 of my warships. I blinked. 47. I had not been keeping count. In the madness of combat, the individual victories had blurred together into a stream of fire and impact and adrenaline. 47 ships, from a fleet of 5 patrol scouts. No species in recorded history has destroyed even one Valkyrie warship during a submission engagement, Thalvrin continued. You have destroyed 47, with patrol-class vessels. I find myself compelled to ask you a question, Commander. Go ahead. Why do you fight? The mathematics of this engagement guarantee your destruction. You cannot win. You cannot escape. Every moment you resist simply increases the number of your own dead. And yet you fight. Every one of your ships fights. Your crew members fight with improvised weapons and mining tools and their bare hands. Why? I thought about the question for longer than I expected, not because the answer was complicated, but because I wanted to say it right. I wanted this ancient, powerful being who had ruled over civilizations for longer than my species had possessed written language to understand the answer not just as words but as truth. Because the math does not matter, I said. We do not fight because we can win. We fight because we refuse to lose what we are. You can destroy our ships. You can kill every one of us. But you cannot make us kneel. And as long as one human draws breath and chooses to stand, you have not won. That is why we fight. Because surrender is not something we know how to do. The channel went silent. I could feel the weight of Thalvrin processing something that did not fit into 9,000 years of precedent. A species that fought not to win, but to remain itself. A species that valued its own defiance more than its own survival. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something that was almost quiet, almost reflective. Interesting, he said. I am deploying my personal guard fleet, 300 vessels of the Crimson Phalanx. They are the finest warriors in the Dominion. They have broken every species ever sent against them. No force has withstood them. I wish to see what they make of you. The channel closed. On my tactical display, 300 ships detached from the main armada and began forming an attack pattern that my computer could not even classify. They moved with a precision that made the rest of the fleet look clumsy, each ship flowing into position like a single cell in a living organism, a predator with 300 bodies and one mind. The Crimson Phalanx, 300 elite warships against our battered 5. I looked at Vasquez. She looked back at me. Then she pulled up her targeting display and started identifying priority targets among the incoming formation. Well, she said, at least it is not 3,000. The Crimson Phalanx fought the way a surgeon operates. No wasted movement, no wasted energy. Every action precise, deliberate, and aimed at exactly the right place to cause maximum effect with minimum expenditure. They did not fill the void with blind volleys the way the main fleet had. They fired single shots, calculated down to the millisecond, and every single shot hit exactly where it was aimed. The Vanguard Dawn took the first coordinated strike. 4 phalanx cruisers bracketed Cato's ship from 4 different angles and delivered simultaneous impacts to his main engine housing. Not enough firepower to destroy the ship, just enough to kill his propulsion. Precisely enough. The Vanguard Dawn went dark in the span of a single heartbeat. Engines dead, auxiliary power flickering, the ship drifting on residual momentum alone, like a stone thrown across still water. I watched it happen in less than 10 seconds. They had not tried to blow Cato out of space. They had surgically, almost delicately, removed his ability to move. "Vanguard Dawn, report," I called. Cato's voice came back steady despite everything, the calm of a man who understood that panic was a luxury he could not afford. "Main engines are gone. Fusion containment is stable. Auxiliary power is holding at 60%. Weapons are still online on independent power. I am not going anywhere, Commander, but I can still shoot, and I intend to shoot until they pry the trigger from my cold, stiff fingers." That was when I understood what the Phalanx was truly doing. They were not trying to destroy us. They were trying to disable us, pin us down, capture us alive. Thalvrin did not want us dead. He wanted to study us. He wanted to take us apart, not our ships but us, our minds, our culture, our defiance, and figure out what made humans different from every other species the Dominion had consumed. The realization sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold of space. Being destroyed in battle was one thing. Being taken apart in some alien facility, while an ancient empire tried to figure out what made humans tick, was something else entirely. I would rather burn. All ships. They are going for disabling shots. They want us alive. Repeat. They want us alive. Do not let them box you in. If you cannot run, fight. If you cannot fight, ram something. We do not get taken. But the Phalanx was already ahead of me. They had studied our movement patterns during the first engagement and adapted with a speed that was almost supernatural. Every escape vector I tried to open, they had already closed. Every feint Okonkwo attempted, they anticipated and countered before she could complete the maneuver. Every flanking run Dreykov launched was met with a counter formation that forced her back into the kill zone. They were learning us in real time, and they were learning faster than we could change. Then they boarded the Black Ridge. It happened without warning. 3 Phalanx assault ships detached from the formation and latched onto Okonkwo's hull like parasites, magnetic clamps biting into the armor plating, with a grip that no amount of maneuvering could shake. Cutting beams ignited along the hull, white-hot lines that sliced through reinforced steel, as if it were cloth, carving breach points with the precision of a locksmith picking a lock. Breach alarms screamed across the fleet channel. Atmospheric containment warnings cascaded through the Black Ridge's damage control systems. Valkyrie shock troops poured through the hull breaches. They were massive, 7-foot armored warriors encased in combat suits that looked like they had been grown rather than built. Organic-looking plates interlocking over bodies bred and trained for exactly this kind of close-quarters violence. Each one carried a plasma lance that could cut through a bulkhead at 30 paces, and they moved with the coordinated precision of soldiers who had done this 1,000 times, to 1,000 different species, and had never once failed. I listened to the boarding action over comms. I could not look away from the audio feed. I could not stop listening. Okonkwo's crew met the Valkyrie in the corridors of the Black Ridge with everything they had. Firearms cracked in the confined spaces, the sharp reports echoing through metal corridors and turning every intersection into a thunder of sound. Improvised explosives detonated in choke points that the crew had rigged during the lull between engagements, turning corridors into death traps that even the Valkyrie armor could not entirely withstand. Engineering teams vented atmosphere from compromised sections, forcing the invaders to rely on their suit seals, while the human defenders retreated to pressurized zones and fought from behind improvised barricades, built from furniture, cargo containers, and anything else that was not bolted down. And when the ammunition ran low and the explosives ran out, they fought with tools, with fists, with broken pieces of their own ship, wielded as clubs and spears. A damage control team on Deck 6 held a corridor junction for 11 minutes, using fire extinguishers and a length of steel rebar. 11 minutes against armored shock troops with plasma lances. The Valkyrie shock troops were magnificent warriors, disciplined, powerful, encased in armor that shrugged off small arms fire like rain. Their plasma lances carved through barricades and bulkheads with terrifying ease. They advanced with methodical efficiency, clearing compartments one by one, securing each section before moving to the next. And they were losing. Not because they were weak, not because they were poorly trained. They were losing because the humans fighting them did not stop. Every corridor the Valkyrie cleared cost them casualties they should not have suffered against a technologically inferior force. Every compartment they breached was defended by crew members, who fought as though retreat was a word that had been deleted from their vocabulary. When one defender fell, the next one stepped forward and kept fighting with whatever they had in their hands. I heard a fragment of a Valkyrie squad leader's report, intercepted by our communications array and auto-translated by our systems. The voice that came through was audibly shaken, something I would not have believed possible from warriors who had conquered dozens of species across thousands of years. They do not stop. We have eliminated 30 of their fighters, and the remaining ones fight with greater intensity, not less. They are using fallen comrades as barriers. They are detonating their own compartments to deny us passage. One of them attacked Centurion Vol with a piece of broken pipe and damaged his faceplate before being subdued. These creatures are not behaving within any known resistance paradigm. Request additional forces. A piece of broken pipe against a 7-foot armored warrior with a plasma lance and centuries of combat doctrine behind him. That was humanity in a single image. Outgunned, outmatched, technologically inferior in every measurable way, and swinging a broken pipe at something that could end them with a thought. Because giving up was simply not an option that appeared on the list. The boarding action ground on. Okonkwo herself led a counterattack on Deck 4, rallying her surviving security teams and a handful of volunteers from the engineering staff. They drove the Valkyrie back through 2 compartments the shock troops had already secured, retaking territory that the Valkyrie had assumed was permanently under their control. I heard Okonkwo's voice on the comms, shouting orders with the calm ferocity of a woman who had decided that her ship was not going to be taken today, or any other day, and who would personally fight every last invader aboard, if that was what it took. But we were running out of time and options simultaneously. The Corsair was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen hull breaches that Drakov's crew was patching as fast as the Phalanx opened new ones. The Vanguard Dawn was dead in space, a sitting target that only survived because Cato's gunners were making the Phalanx pay for every approach vector with concentrated weapons fire. The Black Ridge was locked in a corridor-by-corridor fight that was consuming her crew by inches. The Iron Meridian had taken multiple hits, and Sandra Price was performing miracles in engineering to keep our weapons online, rerouting power through backup conduits and tertiary systems that were never designed to carry this kind of load. Only the little Defiance remained relatively unscathed, dancing through the battle with the nimble grace that only a corvette could manage, too fast and too small to be an easy target. I needed a plan. Not a good plan. There was no good plan available in any universe where 4 damaged patrol ships faced 300 elite warships. I needed a desperate, brilliant, probably fatal plan that could change the shape of this fight in a way the Phalanx could not anticipate. I stared at my tactical display until my eyes ached, tracing the geometry of the battle, looking for a crack, a weakness, anything that could be exploited. And then I saw it. The Valkyrie flagship, Thalvrin's command vessel. It sat at the center of the formation like a spider at the heart of its web, coordinating the Phalanx through a massive communications array that linked every ship in the fleet to a central command network. The Phalanx fought like a single organism because they were connected to a single brain. Cut the brain, and the organism would fragment. Cut the communications array, and 300 ships that had been moving as one would suddenly become 300 individual ships forced to think for themselves. "Hey, Did," I said on a private channel. "Commander, I need you to do something. I need you to know before I ask that it is probably going to get you killed." There was a pause, not long, maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. Then Hadid's voice came back, and it was smiling. I could hear the smile. I could hear the absolute absence of hesitation. "I was wondering when you were going to ask." I laid out the plan. The little Defiance would execute a slingshot maneuver around the gas giant that sat 40,000 kilometers off our starboard quarter, using the planet's gravity well to build velocity beyond anything the phalanx could match. Hadid would accelerate to a speed that would make his corvette nearly impossible to intercept, punch through the phalanx formation at a shallow angle, and strike the flagship's communications array with everything the little Defiance had. It was not a surgical strike. The little Defiance did not carry the firepower for surgical. What Hadid would have to do was ram the communications array at full speed and detonate his reactor on impact. I did not say the words one-way trip. I did not have to. Hadid understood the math. Every member of his crew understood the math. There was no version of this plan where the little Defiance survived. "Give me 5 minutes to brief my people," Hadid said. "They deserve to hear it from me." He came back in 3. "We are ready, Commander." Every hand volunteered. Nobody wants off. Nobody wants off. 40 crew members on a corvette, the youngest crew in the fleet, many of them on their first deep space deployment, every single one of them knowing exactly what was about to happen, and not one of them asked to leave. Not one of them said, "Wait," or "I have a family," or "There must be another way." They volunteered, all of them. "Hadid," I said, and my voice cracked for the first time in this entire engagement. The first time in 15 years of command. My voice cracked, and I did not care. "Yusuf." "It is all right, Commander. We know what we are doing. We know why it matters. Make sure someone remembers us. That is all I ask. The whole species will remember you. I promise you that." "Then that is enough. Little Defiance, moving to launch position. It has been an honor, Commander." Hadid out. The corvette broke formation and dove toward the gas giant. On my tactical display, I watched the tiny blue signature of the little Defiance accelerate away from the battle, curving toward the massive planet that hung in space, like a painted marble streaked with amber and gold. "All remaining ships," I ordered, my voice hard now, burned clean of everything, except purpose, and the desperate need to make Hadid's sacrifice mean something. "Maximum firepower, sustained barrage. I want every gun on every ship firing at the phalanx formation. Open a corridor through their lines. Give Hadid a path, and keep it open until he is through." The Iron Meridian, the Black Ridge, and the Corsair threw everything they had left at the Crimson Phalanx. We were not trying to win. We were not trying to survive. We were trying to create a gap, a window, a sliver of open space between the Phalanx ships that was wide enough for a corvette moving at insane velocity to thread through without being intercepted. Ships were burning on both sides. The Corsair took a hit that tore off its starboard nacelle in a shower of metal and flame, and Dreykov kept firing with what she had left, her ship listing badly, her crew fighting fires on 3 decks simultaneously. The Black Ridge, still fighting a boarding action on its lower decks, unleashed its remaining torpedoes in a spread pattern that forced an entire phalanx squadron to scatter and break formation. The Iron Meridian drove straight into the gap like a battering ram, taking hits on our forward armor that made the entire ship ring like a bell, each impact sending shudders through the deck plates and knocking unsecured equipment off shelves. We bought seconds of confusion, seconds of open space, seconds that cost us hull integrity and crew members and blood. And then the little Defiance came around the gas giant. I have seen a lot of things in 15 years of frontier service. I have seen stars being born, and comets burning up, and the impossible beauty of a binary sunset over an alien ocean. Nothing I have ever seen, or will ever see, compared to what I saw in those final seconds. The little Defiance hit the gravity slingshot at maximum thrust, and came out the other side, at a velocity that our computers could barely track. The corvette was a streak of white fire, cutting across the blackness of space like a comet, with a destination and a purpose, moving so fast that it crossed the distance between the gas giant and the Valkyrie flagship in less than 20 seconds. The Phalanx tried to stop it. Hundreds of ships opened fire on the incoming corvette, filling its flight path with plasma bolts and kinetic rounds, turning the void ahead of it into a wall of destructive energy. The little Defiance jinked, rolled, and dodged with the desperate skill of a pilot who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. Hits struck home. Armor plating tore away in sheets. Atmosphere vented from a dozen breaches. One engine pod sheared off entirely and spun away into the darkness. But the ship kept coming, damaged, burning, shedding pieces of itself with every second. The little Defiance kept coming. Hadid's last transmission was 6 words long. His voice was steady, calm, and clear, the voice of a 26-year-old man who had found something worth more than his own life and was at peace with the price. Tell them we never knelt. The little Defiance struck the flagship's communications array at full velocity. The impact was catastrophic. The corvette's reactor detonated on contact, and the explosion consumed the entire upper structure of the Valkyrie flagship in a sphere of white fire that burned so bright my forward viewport auto-dimmed to protect my eyes. The light filled the bridge for 3 long seconds, washing out every shadow, every console display, every face. When it faded, I blinked against the afterimage and looked at my tactical screen. Payday. The communications array was gone, destroyed completely, and with it, the central command link that connected every ship in the Crimson Phalanx to Thalvrin's tactical coordination network. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Ships that had been moving with the precision of a single mind suddenly lurched, scattered, and began acting independently. Formations dissolved, coordinated fire patterns collapsed into isolated, uncoordinated volleys. Ships that had been covering each other's blind spots drifted apart. The Phalanx was still dangerous, still lethal ship for ship, but it was no longer a single organism. It was 300 individual ships, suddenly forced to think for themselves for the first time in the engagement. And the transition from unity to independence cost them precious seconds of confusion. I did not waste those seconds on grief. Hadid had purchased this window with his life and the lives of 40 crew members who had trusted him enough to follow him into a one-way trip without hesitation. Wasting what they bought would have been an insult to everything they died for. I ordered Vasquez to patch into the Valkyrie's now fragmented communication network. The destruction of the central array had left dozens of local relay nodes exposed and unencrypted. Vasquez broke through their security protocols in seconds and gave me an open channel to every ship in the Armada, not just the Phalanx but the entire 3,000-ship fleet. I spoke to them, not as a threat, not as a demand, not as an enemy. I spoke to 3,000 alien warships as a human being who had just watched something extraordinary and terrible and beautiful, and who needed them to understand what they had seen. I told them about Yusuf Hadid, 26 years old, born in a small coastal town on a world called Earth, a pilot who loved bad jokes and good music, who could name every constellation visible from his mother's garden, who had joined the frontier service because he wanted to see what was beyond the horizon and had never stopped reaching for it. A young man who had flown a corvette into a flagship at a speed that defied calculation because he believed that freedom, real freedom, the freedom to stand up and say no to something bigger and stronger than you, was worth more than his own life. I told them about humanity, about what we were, about the ice ages that nearly froze us into extinction, and the plagues that nearly erased us from our own planet, about the wars we fought against each other, the terrible, beautiful, contradictory history of a species that had every reason to destroy itself, and instead chose to build something magnificent from the wreckage. I told them about our stubbornness and our creativity, and our absolute, bone-deep refusal to accept that anything in this universe was impossible. I told them that we were small and fragile and mortal, and that none of those things had ever stopped us from doing impossible things, when the impossible was the only option left. I do not know how long I spoke. Minutes, maybe. It felt like hours. It felt like seconds. When I finished, the void was silent. 3,000 alien ships sitting in the dark, listening to the echo of a dead pilot's last words, and trying to reconcile what they had witnessed with everything they thought they knew about how the universe worked. Then Thalvrin's voice returned. He was using a backup communication system, his voice thinner, stripped of some of its ancient resonance. But what struck me was not the quality of the transmission. It was the tone. For the first time in our entire exchange, the supreme arbiter of the Valkyrie Dominion did not sound like a being who had all the answers. In 9,000 years, he said slowly, no species has made me reconsider a subjugation order. He paused, The pause stretched out until I could feel it pressing against the walls of my bridge like a physical force. "I am not reconsidering," he said, "but I am pausing." I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. "I am declaring a temporary cessation of hostilities," Thalvrin continued. "This is not peace. This is not surrender. This is not recognition. This is a pause. I am sending a diplomatic envoy to your fleet, not to negotiate your submission, to study you. I wish to understand what makes your species different from every other civilization we have encountered. You will receive my envoy with appropriate courtesy." I looked at Vasquez. She raised an eyebrow. The ghost of a smile crossed her face, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. We were still alive. Against every mathematical probability, against every rational prediction, against the combined military might of a 9,000-year empire, we were still alive. "Send your envoy," I said. "We will receive them with respect and honesty. But understand something clearly, Arbiter. If you resume hostilities, we will not just fight your fleet. We will come for your empire." The silence that followed my words was the loudest thing I had ever heard. When Thalvrin spoke again, his voice carried something I had not heard from him before. It might have been respect. It might have been the first stirring of genuine concern. It might have been the first tremor of something that an empire 9,000 years old had never needed to feel. "That," he said quietly, "is precisely what concerns me." The Valkyrie diplomatic shuttle was a beautiful thing. It docked with the Iron Meridian 6 hours after the cessation was declared, sliding into our damaged hangar bay with a grace that made our own vessels look like they had been assembled from spare parts in someone's garage. The shuttle was sleek, organic in shape, its hull shifting color like oil on water as it settled onto our scorched and dented deck plates. The envoy who stepped out of it was not what I expected. I had spent 6 hours imagining what kind of being the Valkyrie Dominion would send to study us. A military analyst, maybe. A cold-eyed intelligence officer with a checklist and a clinical detachment. What I got instead was Salith Marin, a cultural scholar with large, dark eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, standing 6 feet tall with a frame that was both elegant and unsettling in the way that all alien biology is unsettling when you encounter it for the first time. Her movements were fluid but deliberate, each gesture carrying a weight of intention that suggested a species for whom body language was as important as spoken words. She looked around my hangar bay, and I watched her face as she processed what she saw. The scorched walls, the buckled deck plates, the 3 hull breach patches that Sandra Price's engineering team had welded into place, using salvaged armor from our own damaged compartments. The wounded crew members being treated in a triage station set up against the far bulkhead because our medical bay had run out of beds 3 hours ago. The floor stained with coolant, hydraulic fluid, and blood. And the singing. 2 of my engineers were welding a structural support beam back into place, while singing a work song that someone had started an hour earlier, and that had spread through the repair crews like a benign infection. It was an old song, something about building a road through impossible terrain, and they were singing it with the rough, off-key enthusiasm of people who were too exhausted to care about pitch, and too stubborn to care about anything, except getting the job done, and keeping their spirits alive while they did it. Salith stared at the singers for a long time. Then she turned to me with an expression that I could not read, but that held something deeper than surprise, something closer to disbelief. "They are singing," she said. "Yes. Your ship is severely damaged. Your crew is wounded. You have lost one of your vessels and its entire complement. You are surrounded by 3,000 warships that could destroy you at any moment, and your people are singing. That is what we do," I said. "When things are bad, we sing. When things are worse, we sing louder. It keeps the hands steady and the mind focused, and reminds everyone that we are still here and still standing." She studied me with those dark, absorbing eyes. I had the distinct impression that she was seeing more of me than I was comfortable showing. "I have evaluated 114 species after their first engagement with the Dominion. I have seen panic. I have seen despair. I have seen collective psychological shutdown, where the shared consciousness of an entire species simply collapses in the face of Valkyrie superiority, and the individuals stop responding to external stimuli entirely. I have never, in any evaluation, across any species, seen singing. I led her through the ship. She observed everything with an attention to detail that was almost uncomfortable. She watched the repair crews and the medical teams. She watched the weapons crews who were reloading our depleted magazines with improvised ammunition that Sandra Price's team had cobbled together from raw materials and whatever salvageable components they could strip from non-essential systems. She watched a group of off-duty crew members eating a meal in the mess hall, sharing food and stories and laughter, as if they were not sitting in the middle of the most dangerous situation any human had ever faced. She asked questions, and I answered them honestly. She asked about human history, and I told her everything. I did not sugarcoat it. I told her about the empires we built, and the empires we destroyed, and the millions who suffered in the space between. The wars that lasted decades and consumed generations, the plagues that swept across continents and reduced populations to fractions of what they had been, the famines that starved millions while food rotted in warehouses an ocean away because the systems we had built could not distribute it fast enough. I told her about the time we split the atom and then used it to build weapons capable of ending our own civilization, and how we had stood on the edge of that abyss and chosen, barely, by the narrowest of margins, not to jump. Salith listened to all of it with an intensity that went beyond professional interest. Something in what I was telling her was reaching past her scholarly detachment and touching something underneath that she had not expected to find. Every catastrophe you describe, she said slowly, almost reverently, would have been sufficient to permanently break most species. The Threlian collective surrendered their autonomy to the Dominion after a single pandemic because they concluded that no species capable of producing such devastation deserved self-governance. The Voss hegemony collapsed into permanent stasis after discovering faster-than-light travel because the psychological shock of the universe's true scale was more than their collective mind could process. You have survived dozens of extinction-level events, and each one seems to have made you more resilient, more determined, more dangerous. That is the human trick, I said. We do not get weaker when things go wrong. We get angrier, and then we get creative. The worse it gets, the harder we push. We are a species that invented flight because we were jealous of birds, and split atoms because we were curious about what was inside them. Adversity does not break us. It sharpens us. She reviewed our combat data next. I gave her full, unrestricted access to our tactical recordings from the engagement. She spent 2 hours studying them in a corner of my ready room, her dark eyes moving across data streams that our computers translated into formats she could read. When she looked up, her face had changed. The scholarly curiosity was still there, but it was layered now with something else, something that looked very much like alarm. "Commander Harlan," she said carefully, "your ships, these are patrol vessels, yes? Frontier scouts designed for reconnaissance and light enforcement duties?" "That is correct." "These are not your warships." "No. Our warships are considerably larger, more heavily armed, and specifically designed for sustained combat operations. What you have been fighting are scouts, reconnaissance ships, the equivalent of your border patrol, if you even have such a thing. And your weapons. The beam weapons, the kinetic systems, the electronic warfare suite. These are standard patrol armaments? Standard issue for these vessel classes?" "Patrol grade, yes. Our combat-rated weapons systems are significantly more powerful. Different class entirely." Salith set down the datapad she had been holding. Her hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. "You engaged 3,000 Valkyrie warships with patrol-grade weapons on reconnaissance vessels and destroyed 47 of them," she said. "Commander, I need you to answer me clearly. What would a full Terran warfleet do to a Valkyrie armada?" I met her gaze. I did not answer the question. I did not need to. The silence between us carried more weight than any words I could have spoken, and I watched her read the answer in the quiet, with those dark, perceptive eyes. She looked away first. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, stripped of the scholarly tone, replaced by something that sounded almost like a confession. "Commander, I need to tell you something. Not as a Valkyrie envoy. Not as a cultural analyst performing her professional duties. As someone who has spent her career studying civilizations and understands, perhaps better than most, what happens when they collide. I waited. The Valkyrie Dominion is not what it appears to be from the outside, she said. From the outside, it looks invincible. 9,000 star systems, 412 integrated species, a military force unmatched in known space. That is the surface. Beneath that surface, the truth is considerably less impressive. 9,000 years of unchallenged supremacy has eroded the foundation that the Dominion was built on. Our technology is ancient, and it is powerful, but it has stagnated. We stopped innovating 3 centuries ago because there was no one left to innovate against. Why develop new weapons when no one can resist the old ones? Why improve when there is no pressure to improve? Our military doctrine has not changed in 500 years because no species has ever forced us to reconsider our tactics. Until today. She paused, gathering her thoughts, choosing her next words with visible care. Our subject species are compliant because they have no choice, but compliance is not loyalty. Beneath the surface, resentment festers in every integrated civilization. They obey because the alternative is annihilation, but they do not serve willingly. They do not innovate for the Dominion. They do not contribute creatively. They exist in a state of enforced mediocrity, and the Dominion has mistaken that mediocrity for peace. She looked at me, and in her dark eyes I saw something I had not expected to see in a representative of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. I saw fear. Not fear of me, fear of what she was about to say and what it meant. The Dominion is a hollow structure, she said. It is powerful enough to crush any single act of resistance. It has done so hundreds of times, but it is brittle. It has been brittle for centuries, and no one within the Dominion dares to say it out loud, because admitting weakness is itself a form of weakness in our culture. One crack in the right place, one challenge that cannot be crushed quickly and decisively, and the entire structure could fracture. And if it fractures, Commander, the chaos that follows could consume 1,000 worlds. 412 species suddenly ungoverned, suddenly free, but with no infrastructure to support that freedom. No trade networks, no diplomatic frameworks, no peacekeeping mechanisms, just a power vacuum the size of 9,000 star systems and 100 species with ancient grudges, suddenly free to settle them. I sat with that for a long time. The weight of it settled over me like a physical thing, pressing down on my shoulders and my chest and my thoughts. Humanity could fight the Valkyrie Dominion. Based on what I had seen today, I believed we could challenge them and potentially win. We were newer, faster, more adaptable. Our technology was younger but evolving at a pace the Valkyrie could not match. And we had something they did not. The willingness to change, to learn, to grow. But winning a war against the Dominion would mean shattering an empire that, for all its tyranny, maintained order across 9,000 star systems. Hundreds of billions of beings depended on that structure for stability, for trade, for the basic infrastructure of daily existence. Tear it down without something to replace it, and what would follow? Freedom, yes, but also chaos and starvation and war. I called my surviving captains to a conference on the Iron Meridian. Okonkwo came in person, her uniform torn and stained from the boarding action, a bandage wrapped around her left arm, where a plasma lance had grazed her. Draconkwo patched in from the Corsair via video link, her face lit by the red emergency lighting that was all her damaged ship could manage. Kato joined from the Vanguard Dawn, floating in zero gravity because his artificial gravity generators were among the systems that had died with his engines. I told them everything Salith had told me, every word of it. The stagnation, the brittleness, the potential for catastrophic collapse, the consequences of being the ones who pulled the first thread. Okonkwo spoke first. We have an obligation to fight. 412 species living under the boot of a dying empire that is too arrogant to realize it is already rotting from within. We could free them. Or we could bury them in the rubble, Drakov countered, her voice rough but her thinking sharp. Collapse 9,000 systems into anarchy overnight. No supply chains, no governance, no infrastructure. People would starve by the billions. Wars would erupt between species that have been held apart by the Dominion for centuries. We would not be liberators. We would be the ones who pulled the pin on the grenade and walked away. Kato, measured and careful as always, split the difference. We do not have the authority to make this decision. We are 5 ships on a patrol mission. 4 ships now. This is a choice for all of humanity, not for 4 captains sitting in the wreckage of a battle they should not have survived. We report what we have found, everything we have learned, and we let Earth decide. Let humanity decide. Together, with full information, and with the time to think it through. I listened to all 3 of them, then I made my decision. We are not starting a war today, I said. We do not have the right, and we do not have the wisdom, but we are not making promises of peace either. We bring this intelligence home. All of it. The Dominion's strength, and its weakness. The cost of fighting, and the cost of standing down. And then humanity decides. Not me, not us. All of us. Together. Nobody argued. It was the right call, and they knew it. Salith returned to the Valkyrie shuttle an hour later. At the airlock, she paused and turned back to me. Her expression had changed during her time aboard the Iron Meridian. The scholarly distance was gone entirely, replaced by something raw and complex. Commander Harlan, there is one more thing you need to know, and I am telling you this against my orders, and at considerable personal risk, because I believe you deserve the truth. I waited, and something in her tone told me that whatever came next was going to change everything. Thalvrin has not simply been observing during this cessation. He has not been waiting for my analysis. He has been communicating with Dominion High Command through a secondary quantum link relay that we maintain for exactly these kinds of situations. 6 additional armadas have been mobilized from staging areas across the nearest Dominion sectors and are currently in high-speed transit to this location. My stomach dropped. I felt the floor shift beneath me, even though the deck was perfectly steady. 6 armadas, she continued, her voice tight. Approximately 5,000 warships each. 30,000 ships total. They will arrive in approximately 40 minutes. I stared at her. The cessation, the diplomatic envoy, the pause for study and understanding. All of it. The pause, I said. It was never about diplomacy. It was never about understanding us. No, she said quietly, and I heard genuine regret in her voice. It was about buying time to assemble a force so overwhelming that your defiance becomes irrelevant, regardless of how fiercely you fight. I argued against it. I told Thalvrin that your species was different, that this approach would not produce the result he expected, but the Supreme Arbiter's authority is absolute, and he has decided that humanity must be subjugated by any means necessary. I am sorry, Commander. She stepped into the shuttle. The airlock closed between us with a soft hiss. The shuttle detached from our hull and glided back toward the Valkyrie fleet, carrying away the only person in the enemy armada who had seen us as something other than a problem to be solved. I stood in the empty hangar bay for 10 seconds, processing the scope of the betrayal. Then I turned and walked back to the bridge. I had 40 minutes. I will not pretend that I handled the news with perfect composure. There was a moment, standing in that hangar bay after Salith's shuttle pulled away, when I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel since the engagement began. It was not fear. Fear had been with me the entire time, sitting quietly in the background where I kept it. This was something heavier and darker. This was the cold, crushing weight of understanding that everything we had fought for, everything Hadid and his 40 crew members had died for, had been purchased with a currency that Thalvrin considered worthless. The pause had been a lie. The diplomacy had been theater. While Salith studied us, and I grappled with moral questions about the future of a galactic empire, Thalvrin had been on his backup communications system summoning reinforcements. 6 armadas, 30,000 warships, enough firepower to reduce a planet to rubble, and all of it mobilized and racing toward our position to crush 4 damaged patrol ships that had committed the unforgivable sin of refusing to kneel. For about 15 seconds, despair had its hands around my throat. 15 seconds where the numbers crushed me, and the futility of everything we had done pressed down on my chest like the weight of a dead star. Then I walked through my ship. I did not plan it. I did not make a conscious decision to tour the Iron Meridian in its darkest hour. My feet carried me through the corridors while my mind was still grappling with 30,000 warships, and what my feet showed me was worth more than any tactical briefing. I passed through engineering first. Sandra Price was underneath a console, elbow-deep in circuitry, rewiring our port weapons array with components she had pulled from our navigation backup systems. She had been awake for 19 hours straight. Her hands were burned from a plasma conduit that had burst during the battle. She was humming while she worked. Humming a song I recognized from the mess hall playlist. She glanced up when I passed, gave me a nod that said everything is under control even when it obviously was not, and went back to her wiring. I passed through the crew quarters. Off-duty personnel were catching 30-minute sleep rotations, 3 to a bunk because half our bunks were in sections that had been sealed off due to hull damage. Despite the crowding, despite the exhaustion, despite everything, someone had taken the time to write 6 words on the corridor wall, in neat, careful handwriting. They will remember we were here. The letters were precise and deliberate, each one formed with intention, as though the person who wrote them understood that these words might be the last mark their hands ever made, and wanted them to be worth reading. I passed through the weapons bay. Gunners were hand-loading ammunition into magazines because our automated loading systems had burned out during the sustained fire exchanges with the phalanx. They were working in pairs, one feeding rounds, while the other checked each one for damage or deformation. They were talking quietly as they worked, not about the battle, not about the 30,000 ships bearing down on us. About home. Someone's mother's cooking, a recipe for a stew that apparently required 3 days of preparation and produced results worth every hour. Someone else's daughter's first day of school, a story involving a lost lunchbox and a heroic teacher. The small, precious, irreplaceable human things that made everything else worth fighting for. I passed through the medical bay. Our chief medical officer, a woman named Grace Shelton who had been a trauma surgeon on Earth before joining the Frontier Service, was treating a wounded crew member. It took me a moment to recognize the patient, because she was sitting up and arguing about being allowed to return to duty. It was Priya Vasquez, my tactical officer. She had a piece of shrapnel lodged in her left calf that she had not mentioned to anyone during the entire engagement. She had stayed at her post through hours of combat, running targeting solutions and electronic warfare countermeasures with metal embedded in her leg, and she had not said a single word about it. "I am going back to the bridge," Vasquez said to Shelton when she saw me watching from the doorway. "Stitch it up, give me something for the swelling, and let me go. I do not need the leg to aim." Shelton looked at me with the expression of a medical professional who knew she was about to lose this argument. I looked at Vasquez. Vasquez looked back at me with those sharp, steady, impossibly stubborn eyes, and what I saw in them burned away the last of the despair like sunlight through morning fog. They were not giving up. None of them were giving up. Not the engineers humming while they worked with burned hands. Not the gunners hand-loading ammunition while talking about their children. Not the tactical officer with shrapnel in her leg, refusing to leave her post. None of them knew about the 30,000 ships. It did not matter. They would not have stopped even if they did know. I returned to the bridge. My stride was different now. The despair was gone. What replaced it was something older, something harder, something that came from the same place inside me that had made me laugh at 3,000 warships. It was the bone-deep certainty that if this was the end, it was going to be an end worth telling stories about for as long as stories were told. "Open a channel," I said. "All frequencies. Maximum broadcast range. Every ship in every fleet. I want the Valkyrie Armada to hear this. The 3,000 ships already here, and the 30,000 on their way." Calloway looked at me from the helm. "What are you going to say, Commander?" "The truth." The channel opened. I took a breath, settled my voice, and spoke clearly into the void. "This is Commander Dex Harlan of the Terran Frontier Service, broadcasting to the full Valkyrie Dominion fleet. I know about the 6 armadas you have called. I know about the 30,000 warships currently in transit to this position. I know that your cessation of hostilities was a deception, a stalling tactic designed to assemble a force so overwhelming that our resistance would become meaningless." I paused. Not for effect, because the next words mattered more than any words I had ever spoken, and I wanted them to carry the full weight of what they meant. "I want to tell you something about humans. We have a tradition, one that goes back as far as our recorded history reaches. When we face impossible odds, we do not run. We do not beg. We do not surrender. We make sure that whoever comes against us remembers the cost. We make sure that the price of our defeat is high enough to give the victor pause before they ever try it again. I looked around my bridge. Calloway at the helm, Price listening on the engineering channel. Vasquez, back at her station with her leg freshly bandaged, already pulling up targeting solutions for the incoming armada, as though 30,000 warships were just another Tuesday. Every one of them, meeting my eyes with a certainty that went beyond courage, into something that I can only describe as identity. This was not bravery. This was who they were. 4 human ships are going to fight 30,000 Valkyrie warships today. We are going to lose. We know that. The math is clear, and we are not fools. But some of your 30,000 are going to burn. Some of your commanders are going to watch their ships die. Some of your warriors are never going home. We are going to make certain of that. So I am asking you one question, Arbiter. One question for every commander in your fleet, for every soldier and every pilot, and every officer who is following your orders. Is it worth it? Is subjugating one species worth the price we are about to charge you? I closed the channel. The bridge was silent for exactly 2 heartbeats. Then Vasquez started clapping, slow, deliberate claps that echoed off the scorched bulkheads like a drumbeat. Price joined in from engineering, her applause crackling through the comm system. Calloway pounded his fist on his console. From the Black Ridge, Okonkwo's voice came through on the fleet channel, rich with warmth and steel. Beautiful speech, Harlan. Now let us make it count. From the Corsair, Drakov, direct as always, weapons hot, all batteries charged, ready when you are. Even Cato, aboard his dead and drifting Vanguard Dawn, patched in with quiet determination. The Dawn cannot move, but our guns still work. Point us at the biggest target you can find, and let us do what humans do. I started giving orders. Not complicated ones. There was no brilliant tactical plan that could overcome a 30,000 to 4 disadvantage. Just simple, clear directives, designed to make our last stand cost the Valkyrie as much as possible. We would fight in close formation, concentrating our fire on single targets to guarantee kills, rather than spreading our limited firepower across too many ships. We would use whatever remained of our Shroud protocol to create confusion in the first moments. We would aim for command ships, communications nodes, anything whose destruction would cause maximum disruption and disorder. We were ready. 4 ships and their stubborn, singing, laughing, bleeding crews, ready to fight the entire weight of a galactic empire, because the alternative was unthinkable. And then the sensors went wild. Not from the direction of the Valkyrie Armada, from behind us. From the direction of Terran space. Calloway's voice cracked with something I had never heard from him before. Raw, unfiltered, uncontrollable shock. Slipstream breach. Multiple contacts. Commander, the energy signatures are Terran. I spun toward the sensor display. The readings were impossible. A slipstream breach so massive that our sensors had to rescale 3 times to contain the data, tearing open a hole in the fabric of space that made our patrol-class slipstream exits look like ripples in a bathtub. Ships poured through the breach. Terran ships, warships, real warships, not patrol scouts, not reconnaissance vessels. These were capital ships, heavy cruisers with weapon arrays that dwarfed anything in our fleet. Escort destroyers bristling with point defense systems and torpedo launchers. Electronic warfare frigates already deploying shroud coverage across the entire battle space. And at the center of the formation, a ship so large that my sensor display ran out of room trying to render its full profile. The TFS Goliath Unchained, Titan-class dreadnought, the largest warship humanity had ever constructed. It was a mountain of armor and weapons and sheer, unapologetic power that announced its presence with the subtlety of a thunderclap in a cathedral. Its main gun batteries alone outmassed the Iron Meridian. Its shields could shrug off the kind of fire that had been crippling our patrol ships all day. It was not just a warship. It was a statement of intent written in steel and fire. 72 warships, the Terran Second Fleet, fully mobilized, fully armed, and burning hard toward our position. My burst transmission, the one I had sent hours ago, the desperate message aimed at the nearest Terran relay beacon. It had reached the relay. The relay had bounced it to Fleet Command at faster-than-light speed, and Fleet Command had responded with every ship they could scramble in the time available. 72 warships, crewed by men and women who had dropped everything, abandoned shore leave and maintenance cycles and family dinners, because they received a message that said humanity did not kneel, and humanity needed help. The fleet commander's voice came through on open broadcast, clear and strong, and carrying the absolute authority of someone who had brought 72 warships across the void at maximum speed, because 5 of her people had stood alone against 3,000 enemies and refused to break. Commander Harlan, this is Admiral Kira Tanaka, TFS Goliath Unchained, commanding the Terran Second Fleet. We received your transmission. Every word of it. Humanity does not kneel, Commander, and humanity does not leave its people behind. Second Fleet is on station and ready for whatever comes next. I could not speak. For the first time in the entire engagement, words failed me. I stared at the sensor display showing 72 Terran warships arraying themselves in combat formation around our battered fore, a wall of fresh steel and charged weapons wrapping around us like a shield, and something cracked open inside my chest that I had been holding together with nothing but willpower and stubbornness for far too many hours. Vasquez was crying. She did not bother to hide it. Tears ran freely down her face, while her hands moved across her tactical display with mechanical precision, already integrating the Second Fleet's weapons profiles into her targeting solutions. Calloway had both hands on his console, and his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. Price was whooping in engineering, her voice echoing through every speaker on the ship, and I could hear her team joining in, a chorus of relief and defiance, and pure human joy. 72 ships, against 33,000 when the armadas arrived. Still outnumbered, still outgunned by any rational calculation, but 72 Terran warships carrying combat-grade weapons and fresh crews was a fundamentally different equation than 4 crippled scouts with empty magazines and patched hulls. The Goliath Unchained alone carried more firepower than our entire patrol fleet combined. The math had changed. Not enough to guarantee survival, maybe not even enough to guarantee victory, but enough to guarantee that any win the Valkyrie achieved would come at a cost so staggering that it would echo through their empire for generations. Thalvrin hailed me one final time. His voice was different from anything I had heard from him during our entire encounter. Not the granite authority of our first exchange, not the cold menace of the Crimson Phalanx deployment, not the quiet curiosity of our private conversations, not even the calculated deception of the cessation. This was something new, something that sounded, for the first time in what I imagined was a very long life, genuinely uncertain. Commander Harlan, he said, how many more of you are there? I looked at the 72 ships that had just arrived. I thought about the hundreds more that were surely being mobilized across Terran space at this very moment. Fleet commanders and admirals reading my burst transmission and reaching for their weapons with the same stubborn fury that had driven Hadid to fly into a flagship, and my gunners to hand-load ammunition while talking about their daughters. I thought about Earth. 8 billion people on a small blue world, orbiting an unremarkable star in a quiet arm of the galaxy, every single one of them carrying the same defiant, impossible, magnificent fire that had made 5 patrol ships laugh at 3,000 warships and refuse to stop fighting when the math said they should have been dead 100 times over. How many more of us are there? I started laughing. It was not a strategic choice. It was not a calculated response designed to intimidate or impress. It was real, genuine, unstoppable laughter that came from somewhere so deep inside me that I could not have held it back if I had tried. It was the laughter of a man who had stared into the face of the largest military force in galactic history, who had lost friends and crew members, and a young captain who deserved to grow old, who had been lied to and betrayed and faced with impossible odds, and who had discovered through all of it that the only rational response was joy. Joy at being alive, joy at being human, joy at belonging to a species that had never, in all its long and bloody and beautiful history, learned how to quit. Every human ship laughed with me. Okonkwo's deep, rolling laughter from the battered Black Ridge, Dracov's sharp, fierce bark from the bleeding Corsair, Cato's quiet, steady chuckle from the dead and drifting Vanguard Dawn, because even a man sitting in a powerless ship, floating in zero gravity, could not help but laugh at the absurdity and the glory of this moment. And from the Second Fleet, 72 fresh warships full of men and women who had crossed the light years, to stand beside people they had never met, because those people shared their blood and their stubbornness and their absolute refusal to be anything less than free. They laughed too, all of them. 76 ships of humans laughing in the face of 33,000. The laughter carried across every open channel. It poured into the Valkyrie communications network and rippled through 3,000 warships and out into the void, where 30,000 more were approaching at high speed. It was not the laughter of madness. It was not the laughter of bravado. It was the laughter of a species that had finally met someone who thought they could be conquered and found the idea genuinely, sincerely, cosmically funny. Thalvrin went silent. The silence lasted a long time. I did not fill it. The laughter had said everything that needed to be said, in a language older than words and more powerful than any weapon. When the supreme arbiter of the Valkyrie Dominion spoke again, his voice was measured and deliberate, each word chosen with the care of someone who understands that what they are about to say will echo through 9,000 star systems and reshape the political landscape of the galaxy for centuries to come. I am ordering all Valkyrie forces to hold position. There will be no attack. The Armada did not move. 33,000 warships, weapons charged, formations locked, ready to unleash enough firepower to crack planets, and they held their ground without firing a single shot. I am issuing a withdrawal order to all deployed and in-transit armadas, effective immediately. All forces will return to Dominion sovereign space. On my tactical display, I watched the Valkyrie fleet begin to shift. Not toward us. Away. Ships that had been holding aggressive positions for hours were turning, reorienting, breaking formation, pointing their bows toward the deep void. The Crimson Phalanx fell into escort formation around the damaged flagship. The main fleet organized itself into departure columns, with the practiced efficiency of a military force that had been doing this for millennia, even if it had never done it in retreat. "We will withdraw," Thalvrin said, and his voice carried a weight that went beyond the words themselves. "Not because we fear your ships, Commander. We have the numbers to destroy you even now, and we both know it. Not because we lack the strength or the will, but because I have commanded the Valkyrie Dominion for 400 years, and in that time, I have learned to recognize the difference between a species that can be conquered and a species that cannot. You can be killed, Commander Harlan. Every one of you can be killed. But you cannot be conquered. A species that laughs at the certainty of its own destruction is a species that will fight until the universe itself grows cold and dark. The cost of subjugating you would break us long before it broke you, and the attempt would light a fire that no amount of Valkyrie might could extinguish." He paused. When he continued, his voice was quieter, almost intimate, as though he were speaking not to an enemy commander, but to someone he had come to understand far better than he had intended. "We will be watching you, humans. I suspect the galaxy will be a very different place in the years to come. Whether that is a good thing or a dangerous thing, I suppose only time will tell." The channel closed for the last time. I stood on the bridge of the Iron Meridian and watched the Valkyrie fleet withdraw. 3,000 warships that had surrounded us since the beginning turned and disappeared into the void with the slow, measured dignity of an empire that had never retreated in 9,000 years and was determined to do it exactly once and do it with grace. The Crimson Phalanx followed, escorting their damaged flagship home, and one by one, the sensor returns from the 6 incoming armadas winked out as they reversed course and headed back to their staging areas. 30,000 ships that had been racing to destroy us, turning around and going home because one voice on one channel had told them to stop. The in-transit armadas never arrived. The battle was over. The first battle, not the last. Admiral Tanaka docked her personal shuttle with the Iron Meridian 2 hours after the withdrawal was confirmed. She was a small woman, shorter than Vasquez, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a handshake that could crack walnuts. She walked onto my bridge and stood in the middle of it, taking in the scorched consoles, the patched hull breaches, the exhausted crew members who were still at their posts because nobody had told them they could stand down, and they would not have left anyway. She read the 6 words on the corridor wall outside the bridge. "They will remember we were here." "Yes," she said quietly, "they will." I sat in my captain's chair for the last time that day, alone on the bridge after the debrief and the damage assessments, and the first of what would be many memorial services for the crew of the Little Defiance. The stars were quiet outside my viewport. The Valkyrie were gone. The Second Fleet was holding station, running wide patrols, making absolutely certain that the withdrawal was genuine and permanent. Somewhere out in the black, in the space between a gas giant and a scarred flagship, the atoms that had once been the Little Defiance drifted in a cloud of expanding debris that would eventually be pulled into the gas giant's atmosphere and burned away to nothing. Yusuf Hadid and his 40 crew members, reduced to stardust and memory, and 6 words that would outlive them both. Tell them we never knelt. I thought about Salith Marin's warning. The Dominion is brittle, hollow, ready to crack. The knowledge she had given us, at personal risk, against her orders, was a weapon more powerful than any warship in any fleet. It was a map of every fault line in a 9,000-year empire, and now that map belonged to humanity. We would not use it recklessly. We were stubborn, not stupid. But we would use it. Someday. When the time was right, when we were ready, when we had built something strong enough to fill the void that would be left behind. Humanity would return to this part of the galaxy, not as conquerors, not as destroyers, as something the Valkyrie had never encountered in all their long and lonely reign. Equals who could not be intimidated, could not be subjugated, and absolutely could not be made to stop laughing. I opened my log and recorded the final entry. This is Commander Dex Harlan, TFS Iron Meridian. On this date, the Terran Frontier Patrol Fleet, designated Meridian Group, made first contact with the Valkyrie Dominion, a galactic empire spanning 9,000 star systems and 412 subjugated species. The Valkyrie demanded our surrender and submission. We refused. In the engagement that followed, 5 Terran patrol ships engaged 3,000 Valkyrie warships and held the line until reinforcements arrived. We lost 1 ship, the TFS Little Defiance, with all hands. Captain Yusuf Hadid and his crew gave their lives to turn the tide of the engagement. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. It will not be allowed to be forgotten. I paused, staring at the stars outside my viewport, at the vast, cold, beautiful emptiness that held secrets and empires, and possibilities that humanity was only beginning to discover. The Valkyrie told us to kneel. We laughed. They told us to submit. We fought. They brought 30,000 warships to crush us, and we laughed louder. In the end, they withdrew. Not because we were stronger, not because we had more ships, because they understood, finally, after 9,000 years of never needing to understand it, that there exists in this galaxy a species that cannot be conquered. Not today, not tomorrow, not in 9,000 years, not ever. I closed my eyes, opened them, and typed the last words of the log with hands that were steady and a heart that was full. Let the record show, for as long as records endure, and as long as anyone is left to read them, that when the oldest empire in the galaxy demanded our submission, humanity laughed. We will always laugh. I saved the log. I shut down my console. I sat alone in the quiet of my bridge, surrounded by the ghosts of a battle that had changed everything, and I looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Valkyrie were going home, to an empire that would never feel as safe as it once had. Somewhere out there, 412 species were hearing whispers of what had happened today. Whispers of a new species that had stared down the Dominion and walked away standing. And somewhere out in the black, where the Little Defiance had burned bright and brief and glorious, the stars kept shining on a galaxy that would never, ever be the same.